guy, Rob Demovsky, ESPN.com, part of the team over there breaking the news today. Jaire Alexander being released today by the Green and Gold. Good morning, Rob.
Hi, Gabe. Josh, how are you guys?
Lovely. Happy to be talking to you.
It's football season, right?
Yeah, it is. Well, at least through this week, and then you get like a 6-week reprieve before we get to training camp. And now we know Jaire Alexander not going to be a part of the team. Rob, was this always the deadline? Because I feel like I was trying to figure that out throughout the course of this offseason because we knew Jaire, the situation didn't seem tenable. But it's like, okay, right. Well, they want to trade him. Oh, they got to trade him before the draft. Okay, obviously not. Oh, then does post June 1? Okay, that date came and went. But before he was going to report for mandatory minicamp, was that the deadline all along that they wanted to get something done?
You know, not necessarily, Gabe. They could have let him come to minicamp and just not let him practice. The reason you wouldn't want him to practice is because if he practices and gets hurt on your grounds, then you're on the hook for $17 million this season, whether he can play or not. So I don't necessarily think it was. To be honest with you, they could have taken this all the way to week 1. If they really wanted to. I kind of think just personally, they took it a little too far as it is. I don't know what the market's going to be for Jaire Alexander now. You know, the Packers, I understand that it's a business and maybe they ultimately decided that, the pay cut, well, maybe Jaire decided the pay cut wasn't, going to work for him. Maybe they really did actually want him back if he was willing to pay for X amount of dollars. And we don't know what that necessarily is. Although I did hear that the money was not necessarily the issue with Jaire's camp, but the structure of it, I have no idea what that means. Maybe there wasn't enough guaranteed money. I don't know. But, look, you're talking to a guy who thought this might be settled, before free agency. And then it wasn't settled before free agency. I thought maybe it would be before the draft. So, it's just, I guess, for both sides, it's probably better that it is settled if this was going to be the end game anyway. I do think for Jaire, though, it probably hurts him a little bit now with, teams having filled needs in other ways via free agency or the draft.
Rob, to your knowledge, after the potential for any trade fell through earlier in the offseason, were the Packers and Jaire actively negotiating a contract, or were they sort of given an option and they didn't like it and then we just kind of sat stagnant? Like, how did that process go as far as you're aware?
Yeah, I don't think there was a ton of negotiation, Josh, in there. I think it was, look, Jaire, if you want to come back, here's how we see it happening. Because I don't really think that a contract proposal with specifics was really done until about maybe 2-3, maybe middle of May, 3-4 weeks ago. So it's not like there was a lot of negotiating back and forth. And look, I think for Jaire's part, I think he probably, and his agent, John Thornton, probably said, you know what, we're going to force their hand by showing up to minicamp. This sort of gets back to Gabe's question, originally. Like, if you're the player, you kind of want to know what's going to happen. Where am I going to be? And if you're the team, you want to, and you still think maybe he could help you, you want to try to find a way to make that happen. Obviously, it did.
Talking with Rob Demovsky as Jaire Alexander has been released today. So does he end up in Minnesota, by dinner time today, breakfast tomorrow? When's he going to become a Viking?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question, but I'm sure, Justin Jefferson's probably not, and Amon-Ra St. Brown and some of the receivers in the division aren't, broken up about this, that maybe they don't have to face him. Now, how many times a year does he play anyway, which is the root of this whole problem, and how we got to this point. But, it's be interesting to see what the market is for him. I mean, look, he was supposed to make $17.5 million this year. Well, he already gave away $500,000 of that because he didn't show up for the offseason program. So $17 million in salary and whatever bonuses were left. What is the market? What does someone pay him? Is it $4 million? Is it $8 million? I can't see it being $10 million, but maybe it is. And at this point, like we said, so many teams have used the draft and free agency to fill their needs. I mean, just off the top of my head, it seems like Dallas is always involved in these types of players, right? Minnesota, I suppose, is a possibility, although I'm, Yeah, it'll be
I
interesting.
was joking, Rob, but then you look at
Yeah.
their cornerback room, and you're like, well,
Right.
maybe.
I know. Yeah, right. And I mean there's a few teams like that. You look at I have, speaking of cornerback rooms, I've seen some reaction on social media that, well, now the Packers have the worst cornerback or worst secondary in the league or worst cornerback situation. I don't know if you guys, I'm sure you played the clip of last week from Keyshawn Nixon. I asked him the question, um, what do you think of your secondary? And he went through player by player by player and never mentioned Jair. So even the players kind of knew that this was probably coming.
Off of that, Rob, do you think that corner is the weakest position group on the Packers heading into 2025?
I mean, I kind of thought it was one of the weak ones, even in the draft after they had signed Nate Hobbs. I guess in my mind, I always had written Jair off. I go back to the original reporting that we had done, me, other people on the beat, shortly after the season when, multiple sources, and people were mad at me for saying this, but multiple sources had told me the Packers they were done. They didn't want to go through this. I reported very strongly in February, and people got mad at me, and I stand by that original reporting. I always tell people, I can't tell you my sources, but if I could, you would believe the reports. Um, so I guess I had already sort of written him off, Josh, and thought that it was a position of great need, and was quite frankly, even after signing Hobbs, was surprised that they waited until the 7th round to pick a quarterback.
What do you think the disconnect then is between fan base and analysts and what the Packers are approaching it with? Is it simply they didn't view the draft as strong enough at that position, or does Brian Gutekunst and company think those guys are far better than everyone else?
It's probably that, to be honest with you. I mean, you can even look at draft picks that way. I remember seeing, I can't remember, it was Baron Sorrell or somebody when they got picked in the 4th round. It was like, well, I had him graded as a 7th round pick, or this analyst had him graded. Well, you know what? The Packers did it. So they took him there because that's where they had him graded. And I get a kick out of these people. I had him graded here. I had him. Well, who cares what you had graded? What's your credibility? Who cares where you had him graded? So they reached for this guy or that guy or whatever. So I think it's probably a great point, Josh, and that the Packers feel a certain way about their group, and doesn't mean they won't add to it. Doesn't mean there aren't guys that will come available as training camp approaches or guys get cut. There's a guy they picked up a couple weeks ago, Greg Jr. Is it Greg Jr.? His last name is Junior, and he's a junior, I'm told. They signed him a couple of weeks ago off the street. I think he was a former 6th round pick of the Jaguars. He was got some run with the 1s and the 2s in OTAs. I mean, he's number 38. I don't have my roster in front of me.
Gregory Jr.
Yeah.
Gregory Jr. I know I had Greg part, but Gregory Jr. Jr. This is a guy who's not a nobody, right? And I mean, fans won't probably know a lot about him, but this is a guy who they probably clearly think can possibly help the group.
So with this release, Rob, as we talk with Rob Demovsky, Jaire Alexander has been released by the Green Bay Packers. The Packers get a nice little bump in salary cap because this ends up being a post-June 1 release.
Right.
What do you think some of the things they could do with that money that they now find themselves flush with?
Yeah, so there'll be they were at about $30 million in cap space before this release, and they're going to pick up, I think, about 16 and a half.
I saw a number that had them with the 3rd most cap space in the NFL.
Yeah, I think they were in the top 10 even before this. Right. So I don't know if it allows them to do something that they couldn't already do, because they probably could have already done something with that much cap space. And they only have one more draft pick to sign, I believe the 2nd round pick, which won't take up a ton of that cap space. So I guess I don't think all of a sudden, Gabe, they can just say, oh, well, look, we picked up all this, we can go do something. I think they could have or could do something anyway.
Will Zack Tom have a contract before the season starts?
I'm going to say maybe not before the season starts, but definitely sometime before the season is over. I mean, they've had plenty of guys over the years that have done deals in October, November. I mean, heck, David Bakhtiari's deal was done in November and then gets hurt a few weeks later. So I think that I don't think it necessarily has to be done before the season. I don't think Zack Tom's a guy who's going to say I'm not playing without a new deal. But he's clearly in their plans.
Do they take some of this extra money they have and guarantee some money for Elton Jenkins?
That's what Elton Jenkins wants, and we've reported that before, that he wants to protect against the loss of future earnings. He's got no guaranteed money left on his deal. They're not going to. I shouldn't say they're not going to. I highly doubt they will, give him an extension or redo his deal in a significant way, because it sets a bad precedent, because he's got 2 years left on his deal, and they've never, hardly ever, unless it's a quarterback, do that with a player who's got more than 1 year left on his deal. But I mean, they're going to have to do something for Elton. Elton's not, from what I was told, Elton's not necessarily upset about the move to center. He's just upset that that he thinks moving to center is going to hurt him in his next contract, and wants some added money now.
Well, because also, I mean, you look at the contract, Rob, and obviously the way most of these work, they end up being a little more backloaded. You're making more money in the fourth year. And when he signed this contract, it's like, yeah, you're a guard. Maybe we'll kick you out to tackle, though, because there was some debate if that was going to happen.
Yep.
So the money he's making next year seems like a lot for a center when you take a look around the league, and I'm sure Elton's aware of that, and he could easily be released from that contract next year. So it's really, he's got 1 year left on his deal moving into center. I get where he wants a little more security.
Yeah, exactly. Because let's say he moves to center and, it goes okay, but they think, well, he's going to make in 2026, his base salary is $18.5 million. Maybe they say, he's good, but he's not $18.5 million good, so we're going to move on. And then, there's no way he's getting that kind of money on the open market at center, probably. So, yeah, I understand where Elton's coming from, and from his standpoint, look, he's been, I don't want to say the good soldier, but he's moved around for the team, right?
Mm-hmm.
There have been games where he's played everywhere on the offensive line at one point or another, and I think he's like, hey, I helped you guys out, help me out a little bit, and I think the only way to do that is guaranteeing some of this money.
Rob, what was your reaction, and how did you perceive the local and national conversation about Jordan Love and sort of the reaction from both him and Matt LaFleur about the idea of regressing or simply just needing to play better? Gabe and I were talking about it. We just found it interesting, sort of the defense that Matt LaFleur seemed to offer up for Jordan that they don't necessarily grant to other players on the team.
Yeah, I mean, I think quarterback, as we know, quarterbacks are handled differently anyway. I do think that maybe, there is that people weren't giving Jordan Love the pass for the injury, and not saying that they should have, but it was like it wasn't even taken into consideration, Josh. It was just, Jordan Love didn't have the year that he had last year, so I think from the Packers standpoint, I think they felt like maybe it was a little bit, they're going to stand up for their guy a little bit. I did think the most interesting part of that, though, was Jordan Love snapping back is probably too strong, but for him, it was snapping back because I've never heard him challenge or, he's normally been completely non-confrontational or, he's just willing to let that stuff go. And he snapped back at the idea that, it wasn't as good a year. I don't remember exactly how the question was phrased, but he definitely snapped back. So I think it's at least noteworthy.
It seems like everybody wants to cling onto the word regressed or regression when the reality is, Rob, and I think everybody, Matt LaFleur, Jordan Love would agree that if the Packers want to achieve their goals and they want to be more than a 7 seed that gets bounced in the playoffs early, Jordan Love just has to play better. Like, whether or not he regressed last year, I don't think is, to me, the issue. It's, hey, he just, and not to say that he can't. He's going to be going into year 3, but he has to play better and he has to be more consistent for the Packers to win a Super Bowl.
Yeah, and maybe that's needing a go-to receiver, right? Maybe that's needing a guy that in a playoff game when you absolutely have to have something, he'll catch it. Maybe that's, guys not dropping passes as much. And I think, I don't think anybody would debate, Gabe, that if they're going to go where they want to go and where fans want them to go, that the offense from a passing game standpoint has to be better. I think it'll be interesting to see, how they sort of figure out, how they can still get the most out of Josh Jacobs, but also not just become a running team also, right? I mean, like, you have to throw the ball in this league, and very few teams can win it just running the ball. And I think it'll be interesting to see what the next evolution of this offense is, trying to marry up both of those things.